All right. Welcome to another Doomer Optimism podcast. This is Nathan Gates, Tornado Nate, and I'll be with Long Story Farms today, and we're going to talk with Jacob Wolki um, down in Australia. You're 8:30 in the morning right now. I'm 5:30 in the afternoon, so we're completely offset times of day. We're real excited to talk to you because it sounds like, based on your Twitter account, that you are doing some really neat and exciting regenerative things down there on your farm in Australia. So why don't you maybe, if to start, want to give us a little more detail about where you're at and maybe history of your farm and what you're doing down there.
Yeah, sure thing, Nate. Thanks for having me. It's a pretty short history. I've been farming since 2019. Before then, I was involved in bricks and mortar retail. My family have been retail merchants for the last three generations here in Australia, and that was what I wanted to do. And in a lot of ways, I'm still doing that because our farm sells everything direct to consumer. So I'm still able to scratch that retail itch. On our farm, we raise direct to market beef, pork, chicken, lamb, eggs, as well as a few other smaller enterprises, things like honey or preserved fruit out of the orchard. I also breed dogs. We breed standard schnauzers for the pet market here in Australia. I'm happily married and two young sons, Otto and Theo, 5 and 2 years old, and I'm expecting our third child start of August this year. So we're
Congrats.
I joke to people that I'm a professional breeder. I breed cattle, I breed sheep, I breed pigs, and I breed humans.
Well, congratulations. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when my boys were 5 and 2. That's a rambunctious time.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah. So what, for anybody who didn't, grow up doing it, getting into farming is sort of a interesting and unique choice. What was that about for you?
For me, it was a bit of a health journey. My wife, we've been together 11 years now, and she's always been very in tune with her body, how she feels, how different foods or activities make her feel. And my family's not really like that. We are of the strain, I guess, that blocks things out. If your knee hurts, get over it. Don't see a physio, and definitely don't go to the doctor if you're sick, and just knuckle down and get along with it. And so there was a heap of things in my life that I just accepted as status quo. And the longer I spent with my wife, she'd always go, "That's not normal. You've got a dry cough that you've had for the last 4 years. That's not normal. You've got dermatitis, rashes on your finger that comes and goes every few weeks. That's not normal. Indigestion, allergies. I was a bit of a buckled unit. When I tell this story, I look back at my wife and I wonder what she saw in me. I paint the picture that I was a real sick unit. So started wanting something a bit better for myself and went down the whole food is medicine rabbit
Mm-hmm.
hole and decided that we wanted grass-fed and finished red meat. We wanted meat from animals that had been in systems that hadn't used poisons and synthetic inputs. And I started looking around locally in my town here, and there was a few consumers selling direct to market, but most of them would still drench and put out a bit of super to fertilize, and we just couldn't find exactly what we wanted. And then we conceived our first son, Otto. This is back in 2017, and it really just sort of pushed me along that journey. So we started gardening a lot, trying to do organic no-till gardening in our backyard, raising veggies, raising fruit. And then 2019, my father has a hobby farm. My parents have a hobby farm of 110 acres. And I said to my dad, could I at least bit of land off you and push some chickens around and push some cows around and see if I can do this regenerative mob grazing, strip grazing style of farming, and just with the idea of growing produce for ourselves. And I just loved it. And my, I guess, entrepreneurial mind very quickly thought, well, hang on, if you're going to come out here and move 20 cows and you're just going to eat one a year yourself, why don't you try to sell the other 19 instead of auctioning them off and, becoming a price taker at the sale yards?
Mm-hmm.
So that was 4 years ago now. And, now we've got about 120 cattle in our mob. We've got a few thousand chickens on the farm. We process about 300 pigs a year. We've just started breeding sheep, so we've got about 70 ewes in our flock, 30 beehives. So none of the enterprises are enormous, but they're all
Mm-hmm.
growing. We're really trying to lean in to meet the market where it is here in our area. And like at the moment, my pasture-raised chicken enterprise, I've got 3 portions of chicken breast and 4 portions of drumstick in inventory. That's all I have. I'm just selling out every fortnight when we're sending birds to slaughter. So we're getting a lot of good reception. And as a retailer, that's talking my language. If people want it, I'll keep giving it to them.
Yeah. Now, how many acres do you produce all that on?
So at the moment, we still lease that same 110 acres from my parents. And we have 2 other lease blocks of 100 acres each. So our current gross farming area is about 310 acres.
Mm-hmm.
And the other 2 properties that I lease just have cattle on them. So all the sheep, pigs, egg-laying chickens, and meat chickens are all on that home farm.
Mm. Now, what's that? I don't know anything at all about the geography, topography, anything about where you're at. So what's it like? What's the water? What's the quality of the pasture like? Like just what's the sort of the local ecology like there?
Yeah, sure. We're in Southeast Australia, which is very fertile. So we're in a town called Albury Wodonga. There's 2 towns. We're sister cities. They call us twin cities, one on either side of the Murray River, which is the main river here in Australia. So we're on river flats with 2 of our lease blocks. So very fertile, 800 mil of rain a year on average. I don't know how that translates into inches, but it's enough to get
Me neither.
productive and to, grow grass.
Yeah.
Our summers are very harsh, so I'm going to be talking in metric, and your listeners are probably imperial. But if they want to get on Google, the hottest days I've ever experienced here were about 45, 46 degrees Celsius. And
Okay.
that's the sort of weather where the road melts. You can go and dig your fingers in the tar. You could fry an egg on the car bonnet. It's hot and dry and
Yeah.
brittle, but that normally lasts about 4 months of the year, and the rest of the year's beautiful. So we just
How
plan
long
for
is the
that,
growing season?
and
How long is the growing season there?
yeah, it's probably the other 8 months. We've got our
Okay.
spring is prolific. But before you know it, you'll have grass above your head.
Yeah.
Uh, autumn's very good. We're just entering autumn now, and grass is starting to move again. Winter's pretty slow.
Hmm. So do you feed uh much in the way? Do you have to supplement much with hay, or are you able to stockpile and just have enough grazing, or do you have to feed a lot of hay?
Yeah, we try not to feed out at all. So in the
Mm,
past, we've done little bits when other contingency plans have, like last year, because we're growing the herd. You're always trying to leapfrog to have more land in front of you to support the next lot of animals
yeah.
that you're going to be adding to the herd. And I had a lease block fall through, so I had to race out and buy some hay just to carry those animals a couple months while I could
Yeah.
find another lease block, because I knew that our stockpile wasn't going to last due to our grass budgeting. But as a rule, with our herbivores, our lambs and our cattle, we don't feed out at all. We do free choice minerals, though. They can have ad lib free choice minerals. So
Hmm.
we've built this structure called a lolly trolley that we drag around the paddock with them. And they have things like seaweed meal, stock salt, homemade biochar, copper sulfate, sulfur, molybdenum, selenium, magnesium, lime, dolomite. There's about a dozen different minerals in it, and the cattle just have at that as much as they want, whenever they want. And it's really interesting watching the intake of that fluctuate throughout the seasons in the year.
I bet. I bet. Um, I'd be interested in. I mean, you just told me, but I'm not going to remember all of the different things you put in it. But I'd be curious. Uh, I went to a grazing conference here in Wisconsin a few years ago. It was, must have been 20. It was 2020 because it was in February, right before the pandemic happened. But one of the speakers there was a Dr. Fred Provenza, and he's
Yeah, I
spent a
just
lot.
bought his book.
Yeah, yeah, yes. A great speaker, wonderful, like just a nice, nice guy to talk to. And I was there with the boys because they're both really, interested. Um, and so we had a chance to talk with him and listen to him speak. But, and his whole research was showing just how animals, specifically, I think sheep and cows were what he mostly studied, how they will medicate themselves and they'll eat what they need, and they have an incredibly, like, a large knowledge. Not like, it's kind of weird to use the word knowledge with the animals, but they know what they're eating, and they will seek out certain plants, um, based on their nutritional, needs at the time. And so, you have 12 minerals like that, and I bet it is fascinating to watch which ones they pick when, and kind of incredible to think about. You just starting the interview, you were talking about food as medicine, and here we are talking about cows who do that just instinctually. They kind of just feel and understand what it is they need and consume it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about the life of a cow, they spend their whole day either eating grass or ruminating and chewing cud, and then the only other thing they really do is sleep. And we like to joke that when they're sleeping, they're dreaming about grazing and ruminating. So their
Yeah,
whole day is built around consumption and subsequently absorbing how that makes them feel. Whereas we're so busy, we've got
yeah,
rent's due, you got to take the kids to the dentist, got a mad rush for the school drop off, hate our work, whatever it is, we're distracted. So we're just shoving fast calories in our face because we're on survival mode. But my cows have nothing, there's no natural predators here. There's nothing else to worry about except how does that make me feel? And something else that we do with our animals is we try very hard not to run batches. So to explain that, a lot of farmers will, if they're a finishing enterprise, they'll go to the yards and buy 100 yearling steers and run them for another 6 or 8 months and then sell them off to the local abattoir or whatever it might
mhm,
be. And those animals, it's like having a classroom of school kids. You've got all these kids that are the same age, and
mhm.
it's a monoculture in experience. So we're always trying to keep a mixed age mob because we've observed that these older animals can really tutor and lead the way for these younger animals coming in. So, for instance, I had quite a young bob at one stage, and we had a bit of stinging nettle, which is I don't know if you're familiar, but um, it's a grass that stings when you touch it, and the cows wouldn't graze it. It grew under our trees, and I didn't think twice that the cows wouldn't eat it because I wouldn't eat it either. The stuff's bloody painful when you touch it. And then we bought some older animals and introduced them to the farm. And when their rotation came past that tree with a stinging nettle, they gobbled it up and they taught all the other cows to eat it. And now, 3 years later, none of those animals that we brought on the farm or any of the other animals that were there at the time are still on our farm. But because we never completely destock and completely restock, we're always rolling our groups. That knowledge that stinging nettle's yummy still exists in that hive mind of our animals. So, it's far deeper than we appreciate, I think.
Oh yeah, I love a lot of things about that story. Not the least of which is talking about, the monoculture and experience and age. And this is something, just totally tangential, but my wife and I homeschool our two boys, and that's one of the things I always say about public school. That's just weird. I've always just found it really, well, not always, but I have found it really weird for quite a while. Is, just the idea of these cohorts of exactly the same age kids. When we moved back here to the farm, immediately, and we were homeschooling, and we moved from where we lived in the city to being around lots of other generations, and saw pretty quickly, the boys interacting with people of all different sorts of age, and just the benefit that comes with that. Sort of a strange thing to just segregate people by age. Likewise, animals by age. So that's a pretty interesting comment there, I think.
Well, they're just trying to build efficiencies, aren't they? And you get the
Hmm.
odd child that'll get held back or get advanced to a class, but it's a very monotone, single lane system. And I'm a critic of school. We've made the decision to homeschool our children also, but when I criticise the schools and the institution, I always try not to criticize the teachers. My wife's,
Yeah.
her whole family are all teachers. So when we told them that we we're going to homeschool, it was a little bit contentious there for a while, and they took it personally. Are you saying that we don't do a good enough job? And I'm saying no. I'm arguing that the task you've been appointed with is impossible. Nurture these 40 children, all aged 8-year-old, to their fullest potential. Go. One person, you do
Right.
it. It's a horrible task, and there's going to be children that slip through the cracks. So yeah, I bring my
And
boys to
have
work with me. My eat. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh.
I was just going to say,
Well, okay. I was
I
just going to
bring
say
each of
that.
my sons to work with me on a different day.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
Theo comes to work with me on a Monday. Otto comes on a Wednesday. Wednesday was yesterday here. And Otto and I went to the hardware store to buy a generator. So he engaged with the salesman. He had some very clever questions. He asked the salesman if it runs on petrol or diesel. He asked him how heavy it was. We're talking about a 5-year-old boy that was really engaged and trying to understand about this generator. And then we purchased it, and we talked about how much money it was and how long it would take us to earn that money back through using it. And then we put it on the back of the ute, and we got the ratchet straps out, and I showed him how to tie some knots and how to use a ratchet strap. And the day was just so full of organic learning that Otto was hungry for. No one needed to smack him and say, sit still, this is what you got to learn now. He learned so much about mechanics, social interaction, budgeting, hand skills like tying a trailer load down. You go to a school with 1,000 kids in it, and how many of them can tie a trailer load down? I couldn't tie a trailer load down until I was in my 30s, when I taught myself when I started farming. No one ever taught
yeah.
me before.
That's beautiful. It is so rich, and kids like a 5-year-old, they're so smart. They're so smart, and when they have the room to just be inquisitive and learn, I mean, they're sponges. It's amazing. Just watching, like I said, my kids are a little older now. They're 15 and 12, and they just keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And like now, by the time Quinn, he's 15, I mean, I'm just blown away all the time. I mean, his capacity to learn has far exceeded my own now. At this point, he's like racing ahead. It's like, oh, what, launching. Like it's just neat to watch, and to be able to be so close. Um, and yeah, I'm a very big fan of the homeschooling thing, for all the ways that you just described in your story there. I think it's wonderful, and it's something that when you're on a farm, what a great sort of what a great learning laboratory.
Absolutely. There's nothing else more immersive, I think, and multifaceted than farming for anybody, let alone a young child.
And they're interested in it. I mean, in my experience, I mean, I'm sure not everyone is, right, but it's, I think many kids are, um, I think many kids are very interested in it just naturally. There's animals, there's, they're outside, there's, stuff to do. Like, I think it's just sort of naturally interesting to children.
Well, children want to do what's the most fun in front of them. And we have many counterparts, as I'm sure you and listeners do, that have children that they can't get off the TV or can't get off the iPad. Sitting down, addicted to that blue light. Oh, and they'll complain to me about it in conversation. And for me, it's it's not easy, but it's simple. You need to give the child a better option.
Hmm.
Like I can, if we watch TV, sometimes we don't watch TV much. It probably gets turned on 2 or 3 times a week, and the boys can watch some Steve Irwin if it's raining outside or whatever it might be. But if I want to get them off the TV, I'll just say, I'm going outside to light a fire. Don't have to ask them twice. They want to come and burn sticks and, toast marshmallows. And I let them use my little hand saws and pocket knives. We make spears and bows and arrows and things. And you're not dragging these kids outside kicking and screaming because you've given them a better option. But I just really feel for people in, high density metro areas, because that's not, it sounds simple to give that to children, but if you're in an area where you can't access that, it's not simple, is it?
No, no, it's so it's so lovely to hear you say that too. I'm like, I just, yeah, I relate, and remember, so much like when my boys were that age, and that was the thing. I mean, they still do. I still light fires and stuff like that, but there's just this incredible sweetness. I was just reflecting on this the other day. You go outside, and they get the knives out and they're whittling sticks, and everything becomes a spear or a sword or something like that, and we used to have around our house just piles of sticks and piles of just the things that they go out in the woods. We'd walk through the woods and they'd find them, and they'd be like, man, that's a really good stick. And then of course it ends up piled in my yard, and here and there, and there's a mess everywhere of sticks and rocks. And in the laundry, Emily would always take the stuff out of their pockets. And she saved it for like for like about 5 years. Everything she took out of her pocket, she put in a jar. And then she just got it out, like she just did this a few weeks ago, and she spread everything out that she'd taken out of their pockets, and it was hilarious. She took a picture of it and made it in a frame in our laundry room now, because it's just the treasures that they would find, which could be anything from a rusty nail to a plastic ball to a piece of a cow bone to a rubber band, like you name it. Just the craziest things is. It was just like, wow, the childhood through kids' pockets in the country. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. I'm going to have to talk to my wife about doing that. I bought a treasure chest for Otto, which is actually just an ammo box from the local firearm store. And if we think something makes the cut, we have the conversation, we put it in there. So he's got some beautiful feathers. He's got
Mm.
a rabbit skull that we found when we were foxing one day, all sorts of little bones. He's got a wombat jaw. He's got seashells, ammunition shells, like all sorts of cool stuff. And whenever we have friends come over for lunch or dinner, especially if they're people that we haven't had to our home before, once he warms up to them, he's like, "Do you want to see my treasure chest?" And he brings it out and tells them, some of this stuff's been in there 2 years, and he remembers exactly where it came from and how we found it and what he's done with it. It's incredible watching that sponge mind work.
Yeah, he could probably go and walk to where he found it, point it out.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a clever move too, having a box like that, so that there's because there's a limited amount of space in there. I remember having when I'd go on walks with him, it'd be like, okay, but you can only bring back 3 sticks. You
that's
get
right.
three.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna carry 17 sticks for you. Pick your three best, and that's how many you can bring back.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Um, yeah, it's wonderful. It is a wonderful. I grew up in the. I didn't grow up farming. I didn't. I never farmed, but I did grow up in the country, and so it was really wonderful to be able to get the kids back here and have them grow up outside a lot, and to be able to grow up on a farm. I just think it's a absolutely wonderful way for a kid to be able to grow up, and to have that daily contact with um, with the world around them, with the world of nature, with the world of living things. Um, yeah, I didn't hate living in the city. I mean, I kind of liked it. There were a lot of things I liked about it. I lived in the city for a number of years, but um, there's just no wonderful environment for kids to spend time in. Um, and you didn't grow up. It sounds like you didn't
We
grow up around. Oh, go ahead.
no, I grew up in this same town, but I've lived in town on in town blocks my whole life. So my grandpa spent quite a lot of time with my grandpa when I was young, and he had a 5 acre property with no animals on it. It was just a few trees, and we used to light fires to burn off every couple of years, and I loved all of that. I was just going to say our town's about 3 hours north of Melbourne, and what you were saying about enjoying the city. And my wife and I laugh that we love going down to the city for a weekend. We'll leave Friday night. We'll spend Saturday, Sunday there, and we absolutely adore coming home. We've had our way
Yeah.
with it, and we'll just leave it where it is, and we'll come home to detox for a few months. Uh, and yeah, so there's a place for it. I understand what we do isn't for everybody, but it's certainly for us.
Yeah. Yes, us too. Now, so in just 2019 is when you started. So you didn't spend much time at all around cattle before then.
No, on the 100 acres that my dad has, he used to buy in some steers annually just to finish off and put some weight on and sell them off. One of my dad's good friend is a local stock agent, so he would control everything. He'd pick the animals, get them delivered, tell dad, move dad's farms in 5 big paddocks, so move them from this paddock to this paddock in 2 weeks, and I'll come back in 6 months and drench them, and whatever it was. So every now and then I'd help dad push them up into the yards if they were getting picked up. He'd need a hand, but I never enjoyed it. And it was a chore for me that dad requested I did. Uh, so yeah, not really any experience. I remember going out doing lamb marking for a church friend years ago. Geez, must be 15 years ago. And they were castrating the lambs. They were taking the tails off, and they were clipping their ears. And I was given the job of, you have this hole punch type machine, and they get put in this cradle. So they get laid in a circular cradle, and you have somebody on each side doing one of these jobs. So one person will cut the tail off with a big iron, so it seals it, burns it shut so it doesn't bleed. And then the next person will put a ring on the little ram lambs to castrate them and turn them into wethers. And then they'd come to me, and I'd use this hole punch to cut a triangle into one of the ears, which was this farmer's sign. So if they got mixed up with the neighbour's lambs, they could
Mm.
sort them out who owned what. And the hole punch that they gave me was blunt. So I was having to hack at these lambs, 3, 4 chops, get my fingernail in
Oh,
there and try to cut that last little bit off. And as I don't know, 15-year-old boy, I didn't think too much of it. Like, I didn't really look around and think good or not. It was just a job someone asked me to help with. But, now looking back,
didn't
I'm
it,
absolutely mortified.
didn't make you feel like, oh, I
It
want to
was
be a farmer.
No, no. I said to him, "Oh, I'm happy to come back and help next week if you like, next year if you like." And he said to me, "Well, how about I get those punches sharpened, or whatever those tools are called? How about I get them sharpened, and then we'll go again next year?" But I never heard from him again, so maybe I didn't do a very good job. Maybe he didn't want me back.
Yeah, that doesn't. I had a similar experience with one of my friends growing up. He was, that was my farm experience. Was going over there, and they, so I did hay crews. We put up a lot of hay, and I'd come over when they cast. He had piglets, so and I'd come over for when they castrated the piglets and help with that. And it's not a particularly pleasant job. Though I was always amused by if you throw the testicles away to the dogs, man, and just how much the dogs loved castration day. They were, I mean, it was their favorite day of the year, I'm sure.
Hmm.
But that's
The thing that it's
um,
always surprised me about castrating piglets is the thing they seem to scream about is that you're actually holding them.
mm.
That seems to bother them more than the actual castration itself.
The calves seem to. It doesn't seem to get the calves. When we castrate them too, the calves don't. They don't carry on like I'd expect them to. They kind of just are like, I want to get out of the chute, and then they get out of the chute and jump around a couple times. I'm like, I would think that would be a way worse.
You've got to do them young enough. If you leave them too old, it's a horrible ordeal for them. But if you do it in those first couple months, they seem to just carry on like nothing's happened.
Hmm. Yeah, that's been our experience. We do it. We usually um, do it young. But I want to go back to. I was struck by, and I thought it was a really neat point. Thinking about animals, the cattle, as you mentioned, their whole life is basically digesting, eating, grazing, digesting, in touch. And so I think of these cows then as you're telling that story, I'm thinking of them like these really in touch yogis, right? Who, spend all their time just, meditating and contemplating what goes in their body. And it's funny because I haven't spent much time around cows up until, I mean, 5 years ago. Now I spend a lot of time around cows. But one thing that I notice is I go out and you go out with the cows, and man, it's chill and it's calm and it's calming to me to be around them. So, this vibe of just like, they're just chewing their cud, they're contemplating what they're eating, they're feeling what they're feeling, and like you get that. I do when I go out, and not when I'm really busy choring. Sometimes because we rotationally graze every day, so sometimes I go out there and I'm just all business. I'm like, well, I got to get this paddock taken down, so I got to set this up, and I'm just focused on my task the whole time. But when I take the time to stop what I'm doing, and um, which our animals are really tame, so I go up and then scratch one of them behind the ear, and I'm just out there with them for a while. It's just like the energy, the vibe of it's just so calm. It's a wonderful thing.
It's a grounding experience. If I'm ever feeling a bit um, excited or stressed out or a bit under pressure, I go down with the cattle and I take my shoes and socks off and I walk around
Yeah.
with them barefoot, and even just to lean on a fence post or sit in the paddock with them and eat my lunch. I understand completely what you mean. The energy and the atmosphere that calm uh, big animals like cows put off. There's something reassuring. It's like a big slow hug from Mother Nature.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I relate a lot to, I like to go out there barefoot too. So we're finding all sorts of commonalities here.
When you go out to your mob, when you go out with your mob, and you're looking for that experience, do you find there's specific cows that give you more of a feeling? Like I've got a couple specific animals in my mob that I'm drawn to, and I guess they're drawn to me. Like they don't walk off. They're quite happy to get quite close. And I don't know.
Hmm.
I feel like I get more. I don't know what the word is, whether it's energy or whatever it might be, but I get more out of those animals. There's more of a connection with them. It's really interesting.
Oh, for sure. For sure. We've got the one, she was one of the very first homes we ever got. Sedona is we call her our lead cow because she's always out front. But she's the one, she comes up to you every time. And, she wants you to scratch behind her ear. Like she likes that. She wants that. And, and then she'll just go back to eating. But she's, very much, she's bonded um, especially Emily, actually. Like with me, I'm like her servant boy. I think is how she sees me. Like the grass is grazed. Like you need to move the paddock. But when Emily comes out, she seems to really like, hey, I just like to be around her. But for me, it's kind of more like she views me as a means to an end, I think. But it's funny because you do have this, relationship with them. You know them, and there's, then there's the cows that are going to be a little frisky. Um, um, oh, Now I'm going to pause for just a second and say that I think Geoff Long Story Farms, is trying to log on. So I see him texting us. Do you see that text box there in the chat?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, he's not showing up on the screen though. So hopefully he'll come in. He told us he would be a little bit late. I think he got hung up at work. But yeah, back to that point is absolutely observe that with the different animals. And then there's ones that don't want anything to do to me at all, and none of our animals are real skittish. Like it's just a tame herd. We spend a lot of time with them, so it's not like they're scared. They just don't care. Right? Like when I come out there, they're like, you don't need to come by me, I'm not interested. But then there's the ones that are like, they want to be by you, and it is fascinating to see.
Yeah, 100%. And I've got a lot of different breeds in my mob. So I've got Herefords, Shorthorns, Jerseys, and Nguni, which is this South African breed that I'm moving towards. And I've got Nguni purebred cows, bulls, and a couple first crosses. And I'm more, I don't know, there's something about these African cows that just really tickles me in the paddock. And I've been to Africa twice, spent some time over there with my church. And people that have been to Africa talk about this drawing, this pull that makes you want to go back to that continent once you've been there. And I definitely found that after, like, I've traveled reasonably extensively. I've been to almost 50 countries around the world, and some of them I really enjoyed, and I'd love to go back, and some of them I have gone back to, but I don't feel like there's this yearning or this draw or pull to go back anywhere. No, nowhere's got a hook in me and someone's reeling me in, but Africa definitely has that pull. And when I'm around my Nguni cattle, I sort of feel a similar primal connection as to how I've related with Africa. It's a very strange concept maybe to explain to people that haven't had that Africa connection, but it's fun. This is that 4D level of life, isn't it?
Yeah, that is really interesting to think about. We have we have the Herefords and Shorthorns too. Those are we have not very many because the kids have done particularly Quinn cattle showing and Shorthorns in particular as the animals he shows, and then we have a Hereford and a Hereford baby that Miles shows. But our main herd is Dexter's, which is an Irish breed. That's like our main herd. And they are all very different and have very different personalities. It's really that's really interesting thought to think about them kind of representing their where they're bred for and just kind of the connection to that. Boy, that's an interesting thought. I should go to I think Jeff's coming in now. All right, fantastic.
Here he is.
I did. I reloaded the page and it popped up. So that's great. Sorry, I'm so late, guys.
It's all right. We'll integrate you. We've been talking for a little bit here, and uh, I think you have a lot to add. We've been talking farming a lot. We've also been talking homeschooling a little bit, and that's really segued into that, which I know you're interested in as well. And you haven't been on the Tumor Optimism podcast before, so I wonder if we could
I
kind
have
of
not.
give you a chance. And this is Geoff, which I'm assuming you want your accounted to your Twitter account, Long Story
Sure.
Farms, um, on Twitter. We've interacted quite a bit, so I'm glad to meet you.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, you have a operation in South Carolina. So why don't you kind of introduce yourself a little bit and bring yourself into the interview here and say what you do in South Carolina there.
Yeah. Great. Well, so I work. I have a day job, so that's what kept me from being able to join a little sooner. But what we've done, we have some acreage there in Newberry, South Carolina, and we started off with laying hens about 10 or 12 years ago, and we had a pretty prolific garden in a suburban home, and then we moved to the acreage after a stint in Santiago, Chile, back in 2017, really. And we started adding more and more things. We built a forest garden or food forest, about 2.5, 3 acres of that, about 40 or 50 different species of plants and between the different varieties and species. And then we had chickens at that time already, and then we started adding other livestock really around 2020. So now we're unmanageably large as a homestead, not quite scaled enough to be as farm, and we probably need to be a little more lean in that sense. But we have pasture raised pork and poultry, including chickens, ducks, and turkeys, meat and eggs. We do a little bit of specialty produce in terms of what we market, ginger, turmeric, some heirloom varieties, things like that. Um, we're still pretty tiny. We just started really marketing ourselves in 2021, um, in any kind of official way. So uh, 2022, we did around, a little under $20,000 in sales. So we're getting started with that. Um, Looking right now, we're kind of, I think, at a tipping point where we might have an opportunity to really scale. I think we could do some small ruminants like goats or sheep, to complement the pigs because of the nature of the land that we have. It's a kind of a deciduous forest, hardwood forest, with some plantation pines mixed in. See a lot of opportunity to exploit that with like an agro silvopasture, agroforestry type operation. So that's kind of where we're headed. Keeping the day job to make sure I can fund. I jokingly say losing money as a farmer, but hopefully that's not the permanent state of things. So that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, and I don't think I asked you, like, Jacob, I believe you're farming full time, right? Like that's what you're doing. Is that correct?
So I own a bicycle shop and a cafe in town as well. They're my, I guess that's what I've been doing sort of the last 10 years. And a few years ago, my managers pushed me off the roster because I kept racing out to the farm twice a day to move my chickens and move my pigs and collect eggs. And my staff said, "You're in and out too much. We've had a chat together and we don't need you here if you don't want to be here." And at that time, I was really guilty about trying to chase another business. I felt like I was abandoning my staff and abandoning my primary income source and team. And it was really liberating for them to say, we're really happy for you to do that. And we don't think we need you here in your current capacity. And we'd personally like the opportunity and challenge to grow and develop ourselves and to step up into more of a role. So I haven't done a rostered shift really in the bike shop for probably 3 years now. And I'm full time. I run around between all the businesses plugging holes, but I've got two full time butchers and I've got a full time farm hand and a couple casual farm hands. So the farm operates. Things happen whether I'm doing them or not. We've got systems and people set up to do it. But Geoff, to on your point that you're too big for a homestead but too small for a business, like that growing pain and that transition takes a while. Like I was running around with my ass hanging out for ages there because I was needed at the bike shop. I was needed at the cafe. I was needed at home with a young family, but there was no one on the payroll to look after the animals because the farm couldn't afford it, and
Yeah.
it was chaos. And the only thing that really got me through that was I just loved it so much. The farming was just so much fun, and I really felt a passion for it. So I hired my first farmhand before I could afford him, and I just
Hmm.
offset him with my salary because I'm like, this is not sustainable. And there's a lot of things you can invest in a business, stock, equipment, land, whatever it might be. And I'm a big believer in investing in management. I always, a lot of businesses run counter to me, but I always hire people generally before I need them, and I always run my wages a little bit heavy because all my systems and everything we do relies on people. And if you're
Yep.
always hiring too late, or if you're always understaffing, your people don't want to hang around, and you lose that long term. Like that first farmhand that I put on, whatever it was 3 years ago, is still with me. And he's
Hmm.
good work environment and enjoys his day, and we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to discuss how to do anything because he knows everything. He's been around since the beginning. So it's not an
Yeah.
easy step to take, but it's a necessary step to take.
Yeah, we've been talking about that quite a bit, my wife and I, over the last few weeks. It was a benefit of the work from home situation with the pandemic that it felt like you didn't have to do that because I could run out,
Sure.
at night or maybe take a break at lunch or something and handle something. But that era is coming to a close. I think a lot of businesses, and I do need to keep my job for now, but a lot of businesses are saying, "Hey, we want people back at work," and that's definitely my situation. So we've been talking about how do we get that farm hand. We've just explored a couple of things. If you guys don't mind, I'll just tell you a little bit about some of the decisions that we're looking at. Can you hear me okay? Am I loud
Sure.
enough? Okay.
Yep, you're
Fine.
good.
Um, yeah, so I was talking with a guy who's a lot younger than me, but he's kind of a mentor. He's the guy that we buy piglets from, and he's helped us begin to set up our breeding stock for the pigs. They do Berkshire. They do Berkshire Ossabaw cross, and we're going to tag on to their genetics and try to introduce some varied genetics into that. But we've been talking about that, and they gave me some great advice early, like don't start farrowing hogs right away. Wait, learn how to handle the animals and then farrow. And so we're ready for that next step. But we were talking the other day. They stopped by the farm, he and his wife, and we were talking about, hey, what if I hire someone? A farm manager where we are would be about $4,000 a month. That well outpaces, like I just said, what our revenue was. That would be, we'd be paying out way more than we even pull in, never mind feed and all the other costs. And that might be the right move, for now, because that might be the way that we get to the next level. But he said to me, well, what if you, instead of spending that money like that, what if, since my kids are older and they do help out quite a lot, they're kind of my casual farm hands, if you will. What he said, what if you spent, three or $4,000 hiring someone to help you build fencing and paddocks, and spend it that way, and built out the kind of, I think where we lack what you were saying, Jacob, is we don't have the systems built yet. So we kind of know where we're headed with them, but they're really not built yet. We know we want to move the pigs on a periodic basis. We know we have the feeders and the waterers and all that to do that, but we haven't got it systematized where we can say, hey, it's time for paddock move. We're moving from paddock A to paddock B or whatever. We don't have that set up. And maybe the better thing for me to do would be invest in getting those systems built out and then hire someone. So that's kind of the decision point we're looking at right now. I have 4 older kids. Our kids range from 15 to 22. They're all still at home. They generally enjoy helping out. Not fanatics about it. They don't love it like I do. But there might be an opportunity to hire some people either that mentor them or hire people that complement what they do. So that's kind of the way we're thinking about it right now. I'm not sure which way we'll go, but certainly open to any advice you have. But I love your ethos about how you deal with your people. That's the way I've handled my professional career, in terms of how I deal with people. So totally aligned with that. But anyway, that's kind of where we are on that question.
The other thing is, a lot of people think that when you hire staff, you've got to put somebody on full time. When I used to run the roster at the bike shop, wages were always a little bit high, and I was always under acid to try to curb them down. And then we hired a manager, our first store manager, that sort of took over my role as store manager and let me do more store owner things, more back of house things. And we gave him the wages, like the rostering to do, and we gave him some KPIs that he could aim for as a bonus. And first thing he did was sat all the staff down and said, how does your current roster suit your current needs? And a shock to me was half the staff said, oh, Jake's just flogging me. I'm doing 40 hours a week. I've got my ass hanging out. I've got all these other things. I don't want full-time work. I just want 3 days a week. Or I just want 2.5 days a week. I just want to work weekends. And he cut the roster 6-7 off our turnovers. So he would have cut our roster down, our wages payable, probably 30%. Because in my mind, everyone needed full-time work, because that's what I would want if I was an employee.
Mm-hmm.
So you might find some beautiful old hand, semi-retiring guy, young go-getter kid, some stay-at-home dad, or whatever it might be, who's happy just to do 3 hours a week and be productive and not cost you that $4,000 a month. So there's a lot of options
Right.
out there. There's so many people in unique situations, but you can't have people to manage systems and infrastructure without the systems and infrastructure in place. So there's
Yep.
an obvious first step there. But how are you going to
Yep.
build that? Maybe you need to buy the labor to build it. I can't fence. So when we do fencing, I get the boys to do it. I don't know how to do it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Nate and I had some exchanges, not just Nate and I, but just some different people that we hang out with on Twitter, so to speak, about that question of build versus, build it yourself versus buy the labor to build it. And there's a clear, that's one of the, I think that's another big issue that, starting out homesteaders and farmers have, is that they feel like, hey, I should be able to do this myself. And they get themselves way in over their head with, skill sets that they just don't match what their ambitions are. And then it takes them longer, it costs them more in wasted materials. And by the time they're done, they could have saved money by just paying out 20 or $30,000 and get the fences built correctly the first time. Um, you know, it's definitely one of those big, uh, for me at least, one of those big decision points. And anyway,
Well,
It's also about value. Like we
I was just going to say
Go
that
ahead,
it's like
Nate.
that big point. You mentioned Jacob, and Geoff. You were talking about it's that transition point, like homestead, farm. Homestead. There's a real do-it-yourself kind of ethos. I think for most homesteaders, it's like, yeah, I want to be able to do everything. Farming, you can get stuck on that hump. You can't do everything anymore. Maybe you're a bit like where we're at right now. Well, we're building a herd, so it's like, the herd's growing. Um, the cash on hand isn't growing as much as it's like it's tricky. And our infrastructure needs a lot, and we're investing really heavy in that in the next 3 years. Hiring a huge fence project done this year, and we're doing water. So in 3 years, I think we'll be um, really ready to roll with our systems, and with our herd. But getting over that hump and that transition is just really, really tricky. Um, and I imagine it's like that for a lot of people. It's if you're trying to make that leap, there are a lot of things that change, and it's a very different game. Um, very different.
yep, yep.
It's
I
different
mean,
for everyone.
yeah, we're, I think our next big investment is going to be fencing, but then the other thing is we need a better way to store the meat, the frozen meat that comes back from the processor. So I think one of my next big investments will be a walk-in freezer, so I can actually manage the inventory without having to dig everything out of a chest freezer and figure out, where, hey, where's that box of pork chops? I can't find it. So that's one of the things we want to get set up.
Let's talk about a little bit, Jacob. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about um, your butchery. Right, this seems like a great chance to talk
Yeah.
about. I know that we both have questions about that, and that we're curious. And you can share with our listeners about. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview that you come from a retail background, and this is a really innovative and cool thing. So, yeah, tell us about Wolki Butchery.
Well, I identified very early on in my pursuit of direct-to-consumer farming that the biggest bottleneck for me was processing. And the way it works here in Australia is you send your animal off to an abattoir that's happy to accept it. So I think you guys call an abattoir a slaughterhouse. It's where the animal gets slaughtered. And then that gets consigned to a local boning room, which butchers have, which is where they do their carcass breakdown, make your sausages and your mince, and then you can pick your meat up from there. But it's not common to get that final butchering done at the slaughterhouse. Australia sort of has a two-step process there. And I identified very early on that was an enormous bottleneck because I was using a local butcher who was a good butcher. And a couple of years ago, I was on my way to do a body of beef a month and about 2 pigs a month. And already he was like, "Well, Jake, calm down. That's a lot for me in my little store." And I identified that his main concern was to maintain his display fridge for his customers. And I went and had a look at some other butchers around town because there's a lot of butchers around town. And I was thinking about spreading my processing over all of them, and it just became an absolute logistical nightmare. They were all charging different prices. They all packaged meat differently. Like some would use cling wrap on a styrofoam backing tray, others would Cryovac it. All their label printers were different, so I'd have different labels on all my portions. Some were open to using preservative-free binders for sausages. Others abused me, told me I was going to kill people for not wanting to use preservatives. So it was very unsatisfactory. There was no way there was going to become any sort of meaningful output that way. So I jumped online, and this freehold that I'm sitting in at the moment was for sale. So it wasn't a butchery business; it was a butchery building. It's been a butchery in town here for 75 years, and the owner had sold the business. New owners went bust and closed down, and then he'd sold all the equipment, and he was selling the freehold, which had 3 walk-in cool rooms and 1 walk-in freezer in it. So I purchased that
Nice.
with my wife, and we did a few renovations to the boning room to get certified, put a butcher on. Couldn't afford a butcher. uh, I only had about a day and a half to 2 days worth of work a week for the butcher. That was myself and processing for someone else, but I put a butcher on full time, and I had him out the farm. I was making up jobs for him. He was driving the tractor into the neighbours' paddocks, slashing their weeds for free for them just to keep him busy. He was going into my bicycle shop building bikes for me. Anything I could do just to give him his 38-hour work week. And, fast forward 2.5 years later, and we've got 2 full-time butchers and part-time packers that come in to help pack orders and pack Kryvac meat, label meat. And we do custom processing for about 15 other local farms. So anyone in the region that wants their beef, pork, lamb, whatever it might be, goat, uh, hung, butchered, packaged, labeled, boxed, ready to go to consumer in a above counter way, we can do that for them, and we're quite good at maintaining consistency, uh, nice orderly packaging, and timeliness, because we're not worrying about customers out the front. We don't have a display fridge to worry about. We don't have retail customers walking in. What I did do not long after being here, because I had no inclination to open a retail butchery because our volume was so small. So when I bought this place, I think it was end of 2020. Our was it anyway? It doesn't matter. It was a couple of years ago. Our revenue that year was like $450,000. So to put a full time person out the front of a butchery to sell meat, I would have been looking at a 60 grand salary just for one person, and that would have taken all my net profit out of the whole business. And not to mention sick days, lunch breaks, weekends, and all that produce that I had generated that year, that 450 grand, was already pre committed and sold elsewhere. So I would have to lose all my current customers and accounts and redirect it all to the butchery just to make nothing. Like, it just didn't make any sense. But I kept getting asked for it by customers and people, local people. So I thought, what I really need is a vending machine. I need a big walk-in vending machine where people can just grab the meat themselves. Had a look around, couldn't find anything. Very, very infrastructure heavy to run proper vending machines on a big scale with frozen meat in them. So I ended up just coming up with this idea on the back of an envelope where we have a store. I'm actually sitting in the front of the store right now, and customers get a code. They can enter the building with a unique PIN code on the front door. It operates like a gym. It's the same hardware and software that a 24/7 gym would use. They come in. I've got 3 big triple door freezers here. There are a few thousand liters of storage space each. Everything's in there packaged, labeled, and frozen, minus 20 degrees Celsius, so very hard. And they just grab whatever they want. There's a smartphone on their app where they scan all the barcodes. They hit pay. It comes to me through a online bank, Stripe, and they leave. And it's open 24/7. There's no staff here. We've got a couple security cameras, and that's been operating for about 2 years. At the moment, we're doing about $5,000 turnover a week out of the front with no staff. And we're experiencing no theft still to this day. We're experiencing no losses in stock.
That's fantastic. So can I ask, you mentioned the abattoir. So you still send the animals to the abattoir, but then you receive them back to your butchery to actually process and break down the carcass and process it down into cuts or whatever it is. That's how it works now?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean the challenge here is the slaughterhouse and the butchering of most of those animals has to be supervised by USDA inspection. So the inspector has to be on the floor, on the kill floor for all the kills, and then there's has to be a some supervision of the actual processing. It's not the same you know requirement as a kill floor, and so I'd either have to be regulated. I could probably do the same thing. I could send it to the processor to have the animals hung and then bring them back and break them down in a it would be regulated by a different regulator. So that could feasibly work here. I love the retail idea. We have a retail space that we purchased in a similar way that what you had said, but it is occupied by a tenant right now. We haven't pulled the trigger on changing that. Um, but yeah, that's definitely inspirational. When I saw that video you posted a few months ago, I think it was on Twitter, that was really neat. Really, really, really admired that.
Your guys' uh, processing system seems a lot clunkier than ours. Like we're pretty regulated here. It's challenging to get a lot of stuff done. But when I hear about what you guys have to put up with in the states, like I remember reading some people are having to book animals in for processing months and months, and even up to a year ahead in some areas. If I want to get 4 bodies of beef processed next week, I just flick the guys a text and drop them off. It's very
Yep.
easy in that regard.
Yeah. No.
It's a fucking
No. I
nightmare.
think. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
horrible. It couldn't be worse.
I went to a food to market program run by Clemson University, which is the ag university in South Carolina, and it's a fantastic program. I really appreciated the opportunity to interact with the regulators, but it was quite a challenge, and even for sometimes for the regulators to figure out who actually had jurisdiction over some of the things, the products that people were talking about. And that's the state of the regulatory environment here. It's not so much that any one thing is onerous. It's just that if it's a packaged product, it's regulated by one guy. If it's a butchery product, it's regulated by another guy. And if it's involves the slaughter of an animal, it's regulated by another person still. And so if you want to do any kind of there was one guy that had to have USDA inspected butchering, and he had to have FDA inspected food products and state uh, Department of Agriculture regulated for some other products, and then he had to have the kitchens inspected by yet another agency. So that was, that I don't know. That's hard to navigate, and it's easy to get tripped up. And then most of these guys are very willing to work with you, and I appreciated that as well. But it would be easy to get tripped up and make a mistake. Honestly, make a mistake, just inadvertently, and that's always a really big fear. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have. At least that's my fear, especially trying to get this thing off the ground while I'm working a full-time job. It's like, when do you have time to research the arcane labyrinthine regulations? It's just, you could easily mess that up. So
This is I know you agree with me, Jeff. I mean, this is the kind of nightmare stuff that'll make a libertarian out of you. It's just it's absurd. I've thought about this a lot too, because like if it wasn't crazy, and these places exist. I don't know how they, in certain states, they're like in Wisconsin actually, and I think even in Minnesota they can do this. I want to figure out how to work with the state of Illinois. To me, the best scenario for cattle would be, I would love mobile slaughter units. Like if you could have a truck that could pull up, right, and just you know slaughter the animal in the field. They have a refrigerator truck, hang them in the truck, right then and there, and then bring them to a chop shop. Something like that. I'd love on farm slaughter would be the ultimate thing. I think like no stress
yeah,
on the animal. You could just drop them right there. You don't have to load them. You don't have to move them. They don't have to go through that. And then you can transport the carcass where it can be broken down. Which could be like a shop like yours, Jacob, or just like a butchery that can just break down a shop. And all these layers that are added. I mean, all the regulation is for the benefit of the regulators and for the benefit of the larger corporations who want a streamlined system, right? Like they benefit from regulations that keep smaller competition
yeah.
away.
It's a barrier to entry for a little guy, and these guys can hire the lawyers and amortize that cost across thousands of units. No big deal. But we've done about 24 or 5 pigs a year the last 2 years. we're consuming a bit of that, so not all of that goes all the way to the market, but um, it's man, it's crazy. It really is. Can't make our own sausage, for example. But anyway, one thing that we do take advantage of is we operate under the federal exemption for poultry slaughter, so we can actually butcher or process poultry on farm, and we've taken advantage of that. And that's been pretty neat. Um, Good experience, I think, for the kids to see that whole process end to end. I like that part.
What volume can you do?
So we're right now we're allowed to do up to 1,000 birds. I send some to the processor and I do some myself. So I haven't broken that yet. But with a few tweaks, I could get approved for 20,000 birds. So I don't think I'd ever want to do that many myself, but it'd be great to do 4 or 5,000 a year. That'd be kind of I think my sweet spot. Um, with the right help, not all by myself, of course, but yeah. So 20,000 is the limit. It's funny
Yeah,
though,
that's
you know, they tell you have to have like a facility to do 20,000 birds, but the regulation doesn't require that. It just requires cleanliness, rodent control. It's there's some specific things. So, I do mine like an open air shed. I have a plucker. I have a pretty good process for that actually. And we can do about 10 birds an hour, my son and I together. Um, we could go faster with more people, but it works pretty well. Um, but it's an open air shed. We clean off and disinfect everything before and after. Um, Clean as can be. It's out. It's fresh air and sunshine, disinfecting everything. It's fantastic.
yeah, love it. I bet if consumers could walk through your little on-farm unit and then compare it to one of the big slaughterhouses, we could all bet where they'd buy their chook from.
No
Yeah.
question.
Speaking of which, I've noticed, Jacob, in your Twitter account too, like it seems like you do a lot to try to bring people to your farm.
Well, the farm, that's our biggest marketing weapon, is to leverage community and build community. I think that the farm should be the social heart of our community. It should be the hub. We've lost a lot of social institutions over the years as a culture. Everybody used to meet up every weekend at church. You used to have the local RSA, so the clubs where all the war veterans would, it was built for them, and everyone would hang out there. You used to have the community halls for the Greeks, for the Lebanese, for the Germans. Like if you drive around town, here in my town, you can see all these buildings: the churches, the ethnic clubs, the service bars and bistros. They're all empty. The only ones that have people in them is because they got pokies and liquor licenses. So where are people congregating? Where's the social needs of our species being met? And it's in nightclubs and bars and discos. It's in awful environments to actually build meaningful relationships. So there's such an opportunity for farms to step up and fill that need, and we're just finding that in spades. We do free farm tours monthly generally at a minimum. We do a spring fair. Last year we did our first spring fair and we put it on Facebook. Come to our Wolki Farm Spring Fair. Don't buy a ticket. Don't RSVP. Doesn't cost anything. Just turn up. We had 400 people turn up. We had cars parked on the street as far as you could see. It was just sensational. And we do a lot of workshops, a lot of special fine dining dinners with key speakers. And we've got a lot in the future earmarked to launch. And people just eat it up. People are just hungry to network, find like-minded people, and actually have some community. And something that came out of COVID and the lockdowns was everybody started using the word community a whole lot. But something that really has wound me up a little bit is people are fast to say they want community and they're slow to actually be community. You need to turn up to the invitation, or better yet, you need to be the one inviting. A lot of people think that this utopian social network is going to fall in their lap. But people are messy. Everyone's got baggage, unreliable, different needs, and it requires a bit of grit and a bit of effort to connect with people, to meet them where they are, to form friendships, to keep the friendships. And so something that I've really been harping on a little bit about in the last while is, if you want community, you have to be community.
Yeah, I love that. We started a farmers market last July with in a neighboring town, and the goal we set was to start to build community, and it was kind of a stubbornness on my part, but I went every first and third Saturday since we started that market, even over the winter months, because I believe that being there every week and being consistent was going to make a difference, and I didn't want to break the continuity. And there were weeks where there was one week we didn't sell anything, but there were some pretty poor weeks with, when it was a little bit colder and stuff. But then now people are starting to show up. We have regular customers, and there's just a little nucleus of vendors. We're trading with each other, which is an awesome part of the farmers market for me. I don't think the farmers market's the way to go for the marketing of the farm, but there's a little node of the community that's forming in that spot, which is really exciting.
I'm
Yeah,
convinced
we
that
talk.
all of those social hubs like farmers markets are formed out of a leader martyring their time. None of them get off the ground without somebody just destroying themselves with pouring in free, unthanked, unpaid time. Takes a long
Yep.
time to get them to the point where they're sustainable with a board and volunteers. It's an enormous amount of work. So good on you.
Yeah. Did I completely miss the homeschooling conversation?
Well, it came up because we were just talking about uh well, it was kind of a funny segue into it, wasn't it? Because you mentioned your cattle herd learning from each other, because having basically a mixed age herd. um and I kind of jumped on that with the idea that it's sort of ridiculous that we have all of these same age monocultures of children and going through school, and we
Yeah.
and we both discovered that we homeschooled our children, so had a conversation about that and raising the kids on the farm, and just enjoyed
Yeah.
stories of what it's like to have kids grow up in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, my kids are older, but we've homeschooled all but one of their school years. My daughter went through her first kindergarten year in public schools here, and then after that, it's been homeschool all the way. And we've had great success, even with one of our sons is dyslexic, and that's been fantastic. Um, there are certainly some areas it's been challenging, but it's been really rewarding as well. But I do agree that them being on the farm has also been a great uh, a great thing. I think, like from a mental health perspective, those free spaces that they're out there, and the connection with life and death, the connection with the animals has been really formative for the kids, even as old as they were when we got there. Still think that it was really formative for them to see all those things and understand where their food came from in a very intimate way.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to tie a lot of different threads together here, that we've talked about today, because my day job, as it were, I'm self-employed. I've been I'm a private practice psychotherapist, so mental health is my main gig, which is tricky too when talking about farm and trying to spend more time here. But my business is a service-based business, so that's real tricky. Um, uh, but when we've talked about community, we started talking about health, and Jacob, you talked about your kind of health journey bringing you into this. And I think the need for community, the need to be outside. um, we live in a time, I think, in which um, business as usual can be just really, really, really immiserating. And so that all three of us here, I think, have kind of come to this doing something. We're all farming, and none of us grew up farming. And so I think there's some, longing, some need, to be outside, to be a part of something, to touch grass, as kind of the saying goes. Um, yeah, and that it's good for the body and for the mind, minus the
Yeah.
stress part. There's a lot of that that's not so good.
Yeah. You, you know, like I think what Jacob just said about it takes someone to kind of break themselves to build community, um, is really important thought here, because I think what the systems that we're accustomed to working in, in typical employment type scenarios. I mean, never mind if you're an entrepreneur. There's certainly ways you have to break yourself in a different way, but there's kind of this ethos that like the top performers are the ones that break themselves for the company. And we're breaking ourselves for all the wrong things. I don't like, and I don't mean breaking. It sounds maybe negative, but what I'm trying to say is there are sacrifices that are worth being made for the right things. And building community, raising your kids in a way that they have values, and that they flourish as human beings, not just as automatons that get plugged back into this employment and debt cycle that grinds people to dust. It's just really important to keep that front and center for me. That's I started the idea of the farm really because my mom and dad and my little sister all died of cancer, and I'm like, there's something broken here. I gotta try to fix it. I need to eat closer to the earth, and that's really why we started. Um, that was the impetus. Um, but anyway, I don't mind the early mornings or late nights. I put in a full day with my employer. I give them their value. But then the rest of that time, I'm going to break myself for something that really matters. Is the way I think about it.
Well, and the tail end of this thought is nothing worthwhile comes easy. A good relationship with your spouse, children with integrity, a nice home, a good farm business, a healthy bank account, a chiseled body. None of these things that we all are drawn to and have real, generational cross culture value get given to us. None of it's easy. I hear all the time from people that are trying to build their direct to market stacked enterprise regenerative farm, how hard it is and how much time they're putting in and how much money it's costing them. And they talk about that as if it's a special problem to farming, and they use it to criticize farming at large, which I can do that with the best of them. But show me a business out there that you get for nothing. They all require either capital or sweat equity. Like there's no two ways around it. You're not going to build anything meaningful without putting something into it. So exactly like what you said, Geoff, it's just about figuring out what makes you tick and what's worth suffering for.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if the
And then I think
psychotherapist is going to
once
like the
you've,
suffering thing, but
yeah, well,
go ahead.
Oh no,
suffering's, you could play with that word. You could switch that word out for 15 different verbs,
Yeah,
however you like it. But when there's a purpose behind it, the trial, the context of the trial's different. It's meaningful all of a sudden.
yep, yeah. I
Well,
mean
for
that.
the rec-
You know
for the
the
record, I take an existential bent for sure. So, meaning and purpose and suffering, is a part of life. There's no
Yeah.
conflict there.
I was just joking around. I was just kidding, but because I do think that and I think it's part of the culture that we see right now. Because when people talk about the grind and the hustle culture, and I was thinking about this morning actually. What does that mean? Like if you talk about, man, you just got to grind away, and I think of that positively. If someone said, was raised playing sports, and it's always hustle, hustle, you got to hustle. And now it's like those things are used more as almost synonyms with some sort of grift or some sort of way to extract value, um, or extract an excess out of what could be a true exchange of value. And It's that's the part, like, I struggled so much that when we first started with the farm with how to price everything. And I was giving things away at the beginning. I didn't understand the value of what I had. And then I started realizing that I wasn't going to sell anything at a price below where basically I would be willing to either pay that myself or feed it to an animal if I couldn't get that price. So like right now, if I have an extra dozen eggs I don't sell at the market, and someone came and offered me half price for it, I'd rather feed it to the pigs because they'll get value. That's a closed loop. It doesn't cost me anything. And what I'm trying to say is when I sell something at the prices I have, I know I'm giving value for value. I have no concerns at all about what I'm providing as a product to the customer. They're getting the best that I can possibly do, and really, in many respects, the best that nature can do. And when people try to start extracting value out of a brand or something, as opposed to giving true value in exchange for true value, that's the part that starts to I get pretty aggravated about it. It's a lack of integrity the way I see it. But anyway,
Man, my price list has raised every single eyebrow in Australia that's looked at it.
yeah,
Every other farmer, every other butcher, like everyone just goes, this kid's kidding himself. Yet I can't produce the stuff fast enough. I literally have no chicken in my freezer. Um, you know, I'm waiting for pigs to get processed this week. Like I'm just scrapping to keep up with it because, and it wasn't always like that. The first few years I was doing the bulk discounts on mince and snags, and then I was mincing all my roasts because my roasts weren't selling, so I'd mince them and then I'd sell the mince cheap, and just scrapping any way I could just to keep cash flow moving. But now that we've done the social engagement, we've done the farm tours, we've built the customer base, we've got the website going, we can't keep stock of the stuff, and I'm not going to work for free. What
right.
we've got's valuable, and I've got a certain quality of life, and that my wife and my family and I want to achieve, and I believe I do a good job. And I have this conversation with consumers very openly all the time, which I think probably draws a little bit of a contrast to me to a lot of other direct to consumer farmers, because if they get asked about their pricing, they get offended. But really, you've just been handed on a silver platter, an amazing opportunity to plead your case. So if you're offended, it probably means because you don't believe it yourself. You
Right.
need to shift your mindset. So my favorite way to explain this for people is they go, Jake, your sausages are $28 a kilo. I don't know what that is American, might be $20 US a kilo, which is two pounds. Let's not even try to do the whole arithmetic. $28 a kilo, that's expensive for sausages or mince. And I say to them, yeah, but they're not subsidized. Well, what do you mean? Subsidized by what? I said, well, they're not subsidized by anything. They're like, oh, are other sausages subsidized? I said, well, all food subsidized. I said, firstly, you've got government subsidies that the big packers get. They get all these grants and tax concessions and everything that I don't get. So, we can talk about government manipulating the free market to begin with. But the way we farm our animals is we try really hard so that nothing else needs to pick up the tab. So we don't use any chemicals or synthetic inputs. So we're not relying on, and we work really hard not to overgraze our pastures. We use, organic systems. So we're not letting the environment subsidize the cost of our goods. We don't believe in jamming animals in factories and in sheds to build efficiencies. So we're not asking the animal to subsidise our good by way of suffering, living a poor life. I pay all my staff a good living wage, including myself. So I'm not asking my community to subsidise it. And what you end up with is food that's, for all intents and purposes, unsubsidised and guilt free. And you're looking at the real value. So my meat's not actually more expensive than what it should be. The other meats are actually cheaper than what they should be if they were raised right. And I've had great success having conversations with consumers. And this is, part of the talking point of the farm tour. I sort of weave this into it without hitting them about pricing the whole time. And, not everyone gets it. Some people don't care. They just want $6 a kilo bacon, and they don't give two
Yep.
hoots where it came from, how it was treated, what it's got in it. And that's fine. They're not our consumers. I don't need everyone. I just need the people that get it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It took
Because
me a
that
while
gives
to
them an
believe it. That was
opportunity.
the problem.
That gives them an opportunity. like you're offering them, good food, but you're allowing them also to create something with the way that they're buying, like they're able to support what you're building. um and to be a part of it, right? So we talk about community. It's like, I'm building something in which I'm not trying to take advantage of I'm not trying to exploit any chain in the process, and you can help with that, and you can be a part of that by consuming this really good food. um that's a beautiful thing. It is providing a product, but it's also giving somebody a chance to be a part of building something that's non-exploitive and real.
Well, this is one of my other little sayings is I tell people that we buy our future and we get what we deserve. You know, nobody looks at the video of a feedlot or a factory farm and goes, geez, that's exciting. I'd love to be in there and watch those pigs get jammed in and suffer. Like, no one says that. But on the flip side, they'll gawk at the price of pasture-raised pork. So it's about explaining to them, like, you can actually be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And at least in your world, you can support and pasture-raised pork, which is doing the opposite to factory farm pork. You just got to vote with your dollar. Like, you vote with your dollar every day. You buy a $200 pair of jeans with holes ripped in the knees. So just redirect your values and put your money into things that actually matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Now, speaking of pigs, I did want to ask you, and so this is looping back a little bit. So yours are on. Do you rotate your pigs? How do you what's your pig? We don't have pigs, and I'm curious. I don't know that Emily really wants to do pigs, but I think I really do, because I think people want to buy pork. Well, how do you
Pigs are awesome.
what do you use to fence them in? Yeah.
Well, I'll quickly run through my system, and then maybe Geoffrey can touch on his. But I'm not breeding pigs anymore. I had about 20 sows and a couple boars, and just with everything going on the farm, it was too much space and it was too much time and expertise to manage all those cycles and calendars. So we got rid of our breeding pigs, and the main reason, the catalyst for getting rid of them was I met this fantastic pig breeder about 2 hours north of me who breeds heritage sows on pasture, doing rotations, chemical free. And the pigs are just fantastic. They were far better than the pigs I was breeding. They're a Berkshire composite, so they've got a bit of Hampshire and saddleback in them. Just amazing pigs. And I get them 8 weeks old off him, trained to hot wire. So he weans his pigs behind single braid poly wire on pasture, which is incredible. That's, you've got some systems down pat if you can manage that. So at the moment, we're getting 20 weaners every 3 weeks from him, dropped off at the farm. We send about a dozen to the abattoir every fortnight. They're on pasture. We've got a couple bush lots, so they're on silvo pasture essentially. It's covered in pasture, but it's also covered in trees for shade for pigs. Pigs need shade. And we move them weekly. So we've got very easily portable food. Water's piped around the farm everywhere. So we just hook up a couple pig nipples or whatever we need to do. And we keep them behind a single braid of poly wire, so electric fence, which is about a foot off the ground, which interestingly, we're sending pigs off at about 120 kilos live weight. They're coming in at about 90 kilos hook weight. But we've got a mixed age group. So we've got pigs from 2 months all the way up to 7 months in the one mob. But that one wire at about a foot seems to be doing the trick. But behind that wire, we run electric netting that's off, because our grass gets really long down in the bush blocks between pig rotations every 6 months or so. And with pigs with their poor eyesight, we found that they were walking up to the electric fence, getting shocked, and then they'd run through it, and then you'd have chaos. So we run that net like a chicken net, about a foot and a half on the other side of the electric fence, but it's dead. It's not electrified, so it doesn't matter if it touches all the long grass. We've been doing that for about 2 years now. We've never had a single pig get out. And, I was doing some time and motion studies with my boys earlier in the week, and our mob, it's about 65 to 70 pigs at the moment. It's about $85,000 worth of pork standing in the paddock, and it's less than 5 hours chores a week.
Well, I so like I said, we don't really have the process down, but where what I have, I agree with what you're saying about the a strand of polywire with something physical behind it, so they can see where they are. If we have a strand of polywire with the physical barrier of some kind that they can see, they don't get out. If we tried one or the other, they'll tear it. They'll tear up the physical barrier if there's no electric, or they'll just you know walk like you said. They'll get shocked and run through the poly. So I've seen that behavior as well. Ours are Berkshire Ossabaw cross. Like I said, I do have a few pure Berkshires right now. Um, the goal is to use them to essentially clear some land. So we're moving them a little more slowly, but we do rotate them, and then we let them basically tear things down to pretty close to bare dirt before we move them, because we want to take out a bunch of scrub. It's a bunch of wild blackberries, it's bramble, briar type stuff. We're letting them just basically just clean that up, and then we're going to come behind and seed that in pasture grasses. So that's kind of what we've been doing. We just moved them. I think 2 weeks ago. We'll move them again probably this weekend or the weekend after. So we move them about every couple weeks right now. We do non-GMO ration. We have large, I think it's Bauer feeders. Is it Bauer? No, I'm getting the names mixed up. We have a Brower waterer, and I'm forgetting the feeder, but we have large feeders, large waters. And we move right now. The chore time is not optimized. We want to run poly pipe over to that area so we can run the water down, like you said, hook up the water off of the paddocks. That's not built yet. So those are kind of the things we'd like to expand. We'd like to get kind of a perimeter fence where we are. A lot of coyotes and things that can spook them. Get a perimeter fence, and then we'll run poly wire to paddock it off. Is what we plan to do right now. So definitely aspirational. We don't not there yet.
But it sounds like Jacob, the way that you're running them, it's a lot of it's quite a number of pigs. I mean, really, but it sounds like not a ton of work once you get it down.
Once you figure out what pigs need to stay in an area which is a really hot, consistent charge, and they need a inside of the paddock that they're happy with, the inside is going to be more enticing to them than the outside. I find pigs really easy to manage. Now, if they do bust
Yep.
out, you've potentially got a headache on your hands, unless
I
they're
bet.
going to come back to get their nose in the trough. But, what does Joel Salatin say? You'll never test relationship and religion as hard as when you're herding pigs or something like that, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
they're challenging. When they run at you, they don't respect you. They just go straight through your legs. But like I said, it's
Yeah.
been years since anything like that's happened to us, because we've figured out how to do it in our context, and we're just really tight about it.
Yeah.
Now, I would love
Yeah.
to, in opportunity to scale the pork, I would love to have at a pine plantation. I just reckon that there is such an opportunity, because we're growing all of our timber in pine plantations for our society, and it's a monoculture again, and it's what the pigs were designed to live in. European forests. Like, it'd just be such a great area where they could stimulate some growth of grasses. I really believe they wouldn't damage the trees if they were, around trees that were more than 3 or 4 years old and they were moved weekly or bi-weekly. I can't see any negative
Yep.
effects. Be such a great, they're always on hills, so you could just put tankers of water on the top and gravity feed water down. Bit of labour to feed out grain and move the fences. Like, I think it'll be a sensational plot to produce some pork. But I've asked a couple plantations actually, and everyone's just, it's just this liability mindset. What about if they get
Yeah.
out? What
Yeah.
about if they go feral? What about if hunters come and shoot them? What if a deer gets tangled in the electric net? Like, they're just so worried about every possible little what if that they'd rather just do their thing.
We're- We have our pigs going through an area that was clear cut. It was plantation pines, clear cut in 2015. It's starting to come back in scrub. We're running them through there, and then we're basically moving them over to. There's a road that goes kind of down the middle of the property. We're going to try to get them over to that deciduous hardwood forest and run them along that road all the way back to the back of the property through the hardwoods, where they can eat the acorns from the oaks and the hickories and black walnuts that are native to the area. But we look at a little bit ways to go still to get them over there. But we've been running a mob of, we started off with just 5 or 6 a few years ago. We would do about that many, about once a quarter. And now right now we're running, I've got 4 piglets that we just got this week, and I took 5 to the processor, and I've got, let's see, I've got a one uncut male that's kind of separated, and I've got like 13 or 14 more in another mob. So I've got a kind of a piglet training pen to train them on the hot wire because ours don't come trained. And then I've got a boar pen with the uncut male, and then I've got everyone else in a different mob moving towards the trees right now. So, but a lot smaller scale, but we're starting to get there. We just improved our fencing and gates so that we can, if they do get out of through the electric for some reason, they're still contained behind the kind of a perimeter, hog panel kind of setup. That's the way we're doing it. They've gotten out
You
a
can't
couple times,
overrate.
but go
You
ahead.
need good external fences. Doesn't matter what your systems are in the middle. Like if
Yeah,
you want to keep animals off roads and out of neighbours' veggie patches, your external fences. All my internal fences are just, I call them poor boy fences. I put a star picket in every 10 meters and just single piece of hot wire because all I'm
right,
trying to keep in the fence is a cow, and we just got sheep on the farm, so we're just putting a second hot wire beneath it. But they don't need any tension. We don't need any
right.
corner posts. They're cheap and fast to build. And if I want to move them and pull it out, I'm not sentimental because it'll pull down quick and I can move it quick. But your external fences need to be tight.
We've had
That's what
really. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying. That's what we're doing this year. I'm building 14,000 feet of external fence. So our whole farm will be fenced with brand new, very nice fence. It's a huge project. I've been organizing it and trying to get it put together, but I think we're going to start in 2 weeks. I'm not going to start. I'm hiring it done. Thank goodness. But yeah, it's going to be such a relief to have that. Like there won't be like, okay, an animal's out of the paddock. It's a little bit of a pain, but you're not. They're not leaving the farm, and that's going to be a real. That's going to be really nice.
Yeah. Well, we've had pretty good luck. Even when they have gotten out of our containment, we've been able to get them back where we want them pretty quickly, pretty easily. Um, it's something that's always worried me. I got a batch of piglets one time, and I didn't realize that they could slip through. There was a little place under the hog panel they could slip under, and they all got out, and I was like panicked because I'm thinking, man, I just increased the feral hog population, but the next morning they were all gathered together because they're herd animals. They want to be with their friends, and we got them right back where we wanted them in the training paddock, basically within a couple of hours. So we've been real, maybe we've been lucky, but we've never had any kind of situation where they've broken out. And we haven't been able to get them back where we need them. So I agree that they'll run through you. The first time we tried to load them in a trailer to take them to the processor, we had 4 in the trailer and one that we were kind of trying to force to get in the trailer, and that one squealed, and all 5 of them ran me and my son over. I was trying to explain. I tell people, I'm like, look, that's an NFL defensive lineman with a lower center of gravity. That's what just ran over you, because they're monstrously strong, and they really can be dangerous if you don't know how to handle them. So,
Uh,
but
well, guys, I think it's probably about time to wrap. As we're sitting here talking, I was just thinking because we all met through Twitter, and I know a lot of our listeners use Twitter quite a bit, and the buzz of the last couple of days. It always happens when somebody kind of talks trash about people in rural areas. It always creates quite a stir, and so the idea was that there aren't intellectual people in rural areas, and it just, as we're having this conversation, I'm kind of thinking like, well, how much farming is such a wonderful mental activity, and learning to do these systems and learning about, like, it's just such a, as we talked about earlier with the homeschooling too, it's just like, what a place to use your body and mind, on the farm, thinking through problems, learning about, I find it just mentally stimulating as can be, to be out and to live in this way. And yeah, very much enjoying this conversation for that reason. And Jacob, what, are there any other kind of, thoughts or anything you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I think we've covered a good breadth of topics. All I can say is, having been involved in a range of different industries, hospitality, bricks and mortar retail, um, farming, especially when you're doing mixed enterprise, if you're just doing sheep or just doing cattle or something, you're a bit more of a specialist. Maybe not quite to the same extent, but it's still definitely requiring a real breadth of knowledge and experience and skills and attributes. Like before 4 years ago, I couldn't use a hammer and a nail, couldn't use a welder, couldn't plumb, couldn't handle livestock, couldn't do any meat work, butchering, and I'm not great now, but I know my way around a body of beef or a pig just by watching and helping. And just in 4 years, the amount of hand-on ability that I've picked up, and that's intelligence. That's intelligence isn't just being a like a melanoma specialist and having that very centralized um, depth of knowledge in a very narrow spectrum. Like I think there's a lot to be said to being a generalist and having a really loose grip on a breadth of skills and knowledge bases. So if people are wanting to become a little bit more handy in their own life, go work on a farm for a while.
Seconded. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So anyway, Jacob,
Well,
thanks very much for talking with us.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And yeah, it's been great, really enjoyable. Found, and it's fun to have these conversations with other people farming, and kind of recognizing a lot of the connections and a lot of the commonalities that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like hanging out with big relaxing cows without shoes on.
Yeah,
Love it.
good stuff.